expound more about it?
So actually, think mathematics is based on the research that I did since 2004 when I was still teaching at the university, when I was a professor at the National Institute of Education. And in 2014, England had a new curriculum. So I used the research to prepare the textbook. So it's basically two things. It's first the research on the task, what I call the anchor task. So we actually found out that when we give certain problems, like the 7, 3 and 2 flowers, students will always think in certain way. So that was what the research was all about. So this thing, mathematics, is essentially a compilation of good anchor tasks that can bring a certain way of thinking. The other thing is how teachers go about doing their work. I was also researching into things that teachers do that impact on their professional capital, and things that they do that is just a waste of time. And based on that, we try to make sure they don't do things that are wasting their time. And then things that they need to do, we make them do. So the teaching guide is written in such a way that some things we don't want them to do because we know it's wasting their time, but some things we want them to do. So we will guide them through it because that will add on to their professional learning. So that's what Think Mathematics is. It was originally adapted from an existing Singaporean approved textbook. Singapore has 4 approved textbooks. So it's adapted from one of them, and it was used in England first since 2014. It is called Maths No Problem there. Subsequently, it was adapted for Swedish system, but also the Spanish countries. So now there's a Spanish version, also Catalan version. So that caters to Spain and Latin America. And then more recently, it's also adapted for the Cambridge International Examination curriculum. So that's what usually international or private schools in Southeast Asia use. And also for the US, there's a Common Core edition.
Is it safe to say that this is an approach at some point? A teaching approach? No.
It's not. It's a resource, but it is a resource that facilitates a certain teaching approach. And that teaching approach is what learning theories say teachers should teach mathematics. So it facilitates a certain approach.
What kind of approach is that?
That approach, in brief, is what we call the problem-solving approach, where every lesson begins with a problem. So you're given a problem, 7 flowers, 3 flowers, 2 flowers. Then you go and figure out before we discuss ways of solving it. Also, what they call the CPA approach, concrete pictorial abstract approach, which is based on Jerome Bruner's theory. So Jerome Bruner has a theory that says the learning of all abstraction begins with concrete. So the CPA approach has been quite synonymous with this thing called Singapore math, but it's not a Singaporean creation. It's actually a well-established learning theory, just like we call it CPA approach. The problem-solving approach is based on the work of George Polya. So George Polya, Polya, he talks about it's better for students to solve a problem in many ways than to solve many different problems when they are learning something. So that's.
Is there anything? What do you think are the traditional school systems doing wrong in teaching math to kids, especially preschoolers?
I'm not sure what you mean by traditional.
Or I mean the usual, the conventional.
All right.
Yeah.
So, but any approaches that focuses on rote memorization will surely bring about low achievement. Any approach that focuses on doing procedure, learning tricks without understanding, that will also definitely bring about low achievement. And the third thing is emphasis on tedious computation. That's arithmetic, not mathematics. That will again bring about low achievement. So in many so-called traditional classrooms, somehow those 3 are the focus of mathematics. So if you meant that as traditional, that will be a problem. The other thing is, I think in some so-called traditional classroom, the teachers always explain things to the students first before they even get to do it. Whereas in the learning theories, it is known that that's not a good thing. It's best for students to go and explore first before any structured learning happens. So very often in many classrooms, structured learning begins right from the first minute. This is how you do something. Let me tell you how to do it. Let me show you how it is done. So the learning theory by Zoltan Dienes, D-I-E-N-E-S, say that will cause trouble. You must always begin in a rather playful way before the formal way. So always informal, then formal. So especially in the early childhood, I would imagine it's mostly all informal. But in elementary school, you have both happening side by side.
Do you think, personally, it really works better?
From learning theories, we know it works better. From all the documented results, we know it works better. And from our own research, especially schools that use this approach in England, clearly it is better. Better in two ways, better in achievement, but also better in terms of their mindset about what children think mathematics is all about. So apparently students who do this way of learning, they think that math is figuring things out rather than learning a bunch of rules, which is a wrong idea in the first place. Also, their confidence level. It has been found that in England, kids that use this approach for several years now, they are more confident with their mathematical thinking. So improvement not just in achievement, but also the intangibles.
Does it apply? Does it apply to kids regardless of their? I'm sorry for the term. Intellectual capacity.
There's no such thing as different intellectual capacity. Everyone has the same intellectual capacity. In England, it's used in public schools, so it caters to kids coming from a range of backgrounds.
Yeah,
some,
diverse.
Some are a bit weaker, others are better. In fact, I think teachers think that this works better for the so-called weaker students because it's more concrete, more visual, and they have more time. Anyway, for the advanced learners, they will do well, regardless of what approach we use. You can do anything with them, they will still do well because they got so much intellectual capital with them. They can handle anything. So I think the more advanced learners, you can do this or not do this, they will still be okay. But the struggling learners, those are the ones that if you don't do certain things according to learning theories, they will suffer in terms of their learning.
So the bottom line is, what principles are being presented or usually presented by those approaches in terms of teaching to children?
So the learning theories are basically the two I mentioned to you: Polya, problem solving. So every lesson begins with a problem. Brunner, which says that you must start with concrete experiences, a lot of emphasis on visual. Vygotsky, that talks about importance of students collaborating during learning, not keeping quiet and working by himself. Skemp, S-K-E-M-P, who talks about emphasis on meaning before procedures. And Piaget, who talks about the need for students to have ample processing time. So every lesson focuses only on like one problem for them to really learn something deeply so they can do everything that they're supposed to do, rather than the teacher rushing through like 5, 6, 7, 8 different examples.
Actually, it isn't just the teachers who should be informed about this, because parents should know about this as well, considering...
Yeah, I think both. Of course, teachers need to be trained, but they are. I cannot imagine them going to school of education in the different colleges and not having learned the 5 things I mentioned. It's like, what else do you learn if you don't learn these 5 things? Like you spend 3 years in college training to be a teacher. You must at least have learned these 5 things. So I think as far as teachers are concerned, if colleges of education in the country, if they are doing their job, then I'm quite sure teachers would have learned it this way. Then it becomes a school's responsibility to ensure that all the training teachers get is translated into implementation. Sometimes they get training certain way. When they go to school, if school encourages other things, they will lapse into things which are not sound.
But are many parents already aware of this?
That all depends on the school. So it's just how school communicate what they do with their parents. But what is more important is the teachers, because the teachers is the one teaching. Parents are just parents, so they will be doing whatever they do at home.